Greetings in the Dhamma, dear devotees. Today I will deliver a full discourse on the Dhamma for everyone to listen to. Dhamma is about nature, and in this context, nature refers to the mind itself. In Buddhism, the Dhamma must always be focused on the mind, as the Dhamma does not exist outside the mind. The Dhamma is already complete and fully present within the mind. Speaking of Dhamma as something external to the mind is of no benefit. Dhamma in this context refers to the mind. One must be clear about the mind, understand the mind, and the mind must become prominent. When this happens, we can sense this nature directly and realize that this nature has always been there. All of us possess this nature, but we have never truly understood it. The Dhamma is nature, but this nature does not refer to the external environment. It refers to the nature of the mind. All of us have a mind, and it is with us all the time. Truth and inner freedom are ever present, like the space within and around us. This fundamental awareness flows through every breath and moment of being, though we often overlook its constant presence. The path of understanding unfolds naturally through clear seeing and wisdom, rather than seeking something outside ourselves. When attention rests in natural awareness, we begin to recognize the inherent peace that was never separate from our own mind. This isn't about withdrawing from life, but seeing through the imagined barriers between sacred and ordinary experience. Each moment becomes an opportunity for insight when we approach it with steady presence and receptive understanding. As we cultivate this balanced awareness, we find ourselves less entangled in mental complications and reactive patterns. The mind settles into its natural clarity, allowing a deeper well-being to emerge, one marked by emotional balance, insight, and an ease of being. This innate wholeness reveals itself not through striving, but through the wisdom that recognizes what was always here. The best way to attain the Dhamma is by listening to it. Remember this: listening to the Dhamma is the most effective, easiest, and supreme method for realizing the Dhamma. This is because it integrates everything at the moment of listening. However, the one who teaches the Dhamma must excel greatly in wisdom and must have the skill and technique to guide the listener toward realization while listening. During the Buddha's time, whenever the Buddha taught the Dhamma, people attained realization while listening, not through other methods. Although some attained realization through other means, they were few. The primary way was through listening. By listening, understanding arises, and this understanding penetrates the heart. At that point, the listener is ready to attain the Dhamma at any moment during the discourse. Listening with focus and understanding makes realization possible. The Dhamma is difficult to understand. I will focus solely on the teaching of anatta, non-self. As I deliver these teachings, you must listen repeatedly many times over until you attain realization. As long as you have not attained the Dhamma, you must continue to listen, even until the end of this life. In this very lifetime, all of us can realize the Dhamma. It does not depend on being male or female, young or old, child or elder, shaven-headed or not. None of that matters. Every one of us has the potential to attain the Dhamma. When the mind gains insight and sees the truth clearly, wisdom arises. This wisdom reveals that there is no self, and the sense of self dissolves. The mind then becomes liberated, and we experience increasing ease and freedom. Anyone who listens to my Dhamma recordings consistently will feel progressively lighter, both in body and mind, more clear and free. Over time, this path will lead you to become an Arya Pugala, noble person in this very lifetime. I will teach based on the framework of the four foundations of mindfulness, Satipatthana, presenting it in a way that allows everyone to understand and naturally practice as they listen. While listening, you will follow along in thought, sometimes feeling doubt, sometimes not, reflecting and contemplating. This process penetrates deeply into your own mind. You must observe how emotions arise and see your own thoughts clearly. When you can see them and understand them, this understanding will sink deeper into your mind. As this process continues, the mind will develop on its own until it declares its understanding of the Dhamma. You will know for yourself as doubts gradually fade away, and the Dhamma becomes evident at all times from the moment you wake up until you sleep. This is achievable for everyone because all of us already have a mind. It does not matter if you are busy working or engaged in other activities. From the time you wake up until you go to sleep, you are always capable of attaining the Dhamma. The key is first to understand what your mind is, how it works, and observe its patterns regularly. With this ongoing awareness, realization becomes possible. The principles of seeing impermanence, anicca, suffering, dukkha, and non-self will be explained so that you can understand how to perceive them, comprehend them, and attain liberation through them. This realization will come from within, without needing to do anything extraordinary, like isolating yourself in a quiet forest. Dhamma is not found in the forest or any external circumstances. It exists within the mind. It is within your mind that you must search for it. Many practitioners misunderstand and become deluded, believing they have attained some position or status in their practice. They boast about their achievements, claiming to be this or that. However, true Dhamma practice does not lead to pride or attachment to identity. Instead, it extinguishes the notion of self. When the sense of self is extinguished, one realizes that even the body is not me, and the mind itself is not mine. When everything is fully extinguished, what remains? Nothing remains to be or become. That is Arahata Phala, the fruition of arahantship, the end of becoming and rebirth. This realization brings an increasing sense of clarity, lightness, and profound peace. It is an extraordinary transformation that unfolds naturally in the mind, revealing the intricate workings of consciousness in such fine detail that it becomes indescribable. It is a realization that is pakkatam, to be known individually, and sandithika, directly visible and verifiable. This is how Dhamma practice should be. You will come to understand what it truly means to know and see the Dhamma. The Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, the triple gem, Tiratana, already exist within your mind. Once you realize this, you will no longer seek Dhamma outside the mind. You will know that this is the ultimate end of suffering, the highest truth, and nothing surpasses it. This is similar to how the Buddha, after his enlightenment, realized that he had reached the ultimate end of suffering. He recognized that this was the highest attainment beyond anything else. Even the jhanas, or meditative absorptions, including the eighth absorption, Samapatti 8, which ascetics of his time considered the pinnacle of spiritual achievement, were not the ultimate liberation. When the Buddha reached the eighth absorption, he saw for himself that it was not the end. Why? Because suffering remained. The mind was still restless. In deep absorption, nothing seemed to exist. But as soon as the concentration dissipated, thoughts, emotions, and suffering returned, often more intensely than before. This led the Buddha to reflect deeply on why it wasn't the ultimate path. Through this reflection, he discovered the middle way, the path of balance, free from extremes. This was the path that led him to complete liberation, to the realization of Nibbana, the true and final cessation of suffering. The Buddha observed the nature of the body and the breath, simply watching the natural process of inhaling and exhaling. He observed the changing and impermanent nature of these phenomena. Gradually, his mind became increasingly refined, leading to deep insight and understanding that this nature is not self and not ours. As he delved deeper into the mind, he discerned the fabrications of mental formations, both those inclined towards pleasurable states, good destinies, and those inclined towards painful states, bad destinies. He saw that all such fabrications are impermanent, bound with suffering, and devoid of self. The Buddha realized that this natural process of phenomena is not self and not ours. In this profound journey of awakening, consciousness moved through distinct stages of realization, from the initial glimpse of truth, through deepening understanding, to complete liberation. This universal path revealed itself as a balanced way between extremes, where one sees how the mind creates opposing forces. Through deep insight, it became clear how mental patterns weave a web of attachments to pleasure and pain, creating an illusion of separate selfhood. Yet when seen with wisdom, these apparent dualities dissolve into their true empty nature, free from any inherent identity or ownership. When this understanding became fully clear, and doubt was entirely dispelled, His mind stood out with clarity and prominence. He realized one-pointedness of mind, ekagata citta, attaining the ultimate cessation of suffering, the end of all dukkha. Dhamma is a matter of the mind, not something external to it. Therefore, we should not seek the Dhamma outside our own minds. No matter how hard we search for Dhamma externally, we will never find it. Some people look for Dhamma in external places, getting attached to teachers, traveling to find this teacher or that teacher, visiting various temples, or even seeking the Buddha in distant lands and countries. Yet they neglect the Dhamma that already exists within their own minds. By ignoring the Dhamma within, they fail to encounter or understand it. Consequently, they remain trapped in the cycle of birth and death, endlessly wandering, experiencing joy and suffering, clinging to worldly dualities of happiness and sorrow. Many study Dhamma for years, even decades, yet fail to understand it because they overlook the truth. Dhamma already resides within their own minds. Their desire to see it remains unfulfilled because they never truly turn inwards. Remember this, Dhamma already exists within the mind. The mind is a natural awareness, an essence free from fabrication and beyond verbal explanation. This natural state of the mind is with all of us. Yet paradoxically, we have never truly recognized it. It is a profound truth, and when reflected upon, it evokes both compassion and sorrow for how often it is overlooked. In the past, I too did not understand this, but now I am no longer doubtful. I want to share this truth. We already possess this natural essence within. To use a metaphor, if the mind is water, then mental formations, citta sankhara, are like waves. Just as water naturally has waves, the mind naturally has mental formations. These formations are activities or expressions of the mind. Just as waves are movements of water, the mind is the origin, and mental formations arise dependent on it. Without the mind, there can be no mental formations. This is a crucial point to understand. Similarly, waves cannot exist without water. Waves are actions of water, but they are not the water itself. Whether the waves are strong or gentle, frequent or rare, coarse or subtle, they do not change the nature of the water. Waves lack inherent reality. Only the water truly exists. The waves are merely water in a certain state of motion. Citta sankhara manifests as thoughts, emotions, and mental images. These fabrications arise and then form into thoughts, inner dialogues, mental chatter, or as mental images appearing in the mind. However, these mental formations are not inherently real. They are impermanent fabricated phenomena that continuously arise and cease. They create stories and concepts but exist only temporarily, floating into existence, persisting for a moment, and then dissolving, only to arise again. This is their nature. Importantly, no one owns these fabrications. They function autonomously, with the sole purpose of creating and fabricating. Their very nature is to fabricate. They simply arise and perform their task of fabricating because that is their nature. They do not know why they fabricate, yet they continue doing so endlessly. Consciousness in its essence is luminous and knowing, yet this natural clarity is veiled by fundamental misunderstanding. The mind's confusion causes it to become entangled with its own thought patterns and conceptual formations. This obscuration isn't something external or separate. It's simply the mind's temporary failure to recognize its own true nature. This lack of clear seeing is what initiates the mind's endless movement and becoming. Like waves arising from still water, the mind's misapprehension of reality creates ripples of identity and attachment. When we don't recognize things as they are, we grasp at appearances as solid and real, claiming bodies, relationships, ideas and experiences as mine and self. The mind then builds elaborate structures of concept and meaning, wrapping itself in layers of thought, language, time, and social convention. These mental formations become a kind of cosmic illusion that seems utterly real and binding. Yet this entire edifice rests on a fundamental misperception, the belief in a separate, enduring self that owns and experiences. When this root delusion is fully seen through, the mind's compulsive arising naturally subsides. Like a mirage dissolving when clearly perceived, the apparent solidity of self and world reveals its empty nature. The cycle of becoming comes to rest in the mind's original clarity. The mind is like iron covered by rust. The iron by its true nature remains iron and is aware of itself as such. However, as rust accumulates over time, the iron becomes so enveloped that it identifies itself as rust, forgetting its true nature. Similarly, the mind clouded by ignorance, avidya, clings to mental formations, citta sankhara, and mistakenly identifies with them, creating a false sense of self and attachment. This delusion leads to the belief that external objects, thoughts, and even abstract constructs like time, language, and social norms are inherently real and part of oneself. Over time, the mind becomes so fixated on fulfilling desires for happiness and avoiding suffering that it loses touch with its true nature. This pursuit of happiness through wealth, possessions, and achievements only amplifies suffering, as happiness and suffering are inseparable. The more the mind clings to external sources for satisfaction, the further it strays from its original awareness of itself as pure consciousness. An analogy is like picking up a coin. Whatever we get both heads and tails. We can't have just heads alone. We must get tails too. This is because the natural state of mental formations, citta sankhara, always concocts things in pairs. The more we desire the positive side, the higher the negative side rises. Therefore, living beings remain trapped and deluded in the three realms, unable to find their origin or escape the cycle of birth and death. This is because they've forgotten that their true nature is the mind, citta. We've forgotten that we are the mind. We think we are the body. We think this house is truly ours. This family is truly ours. These parents, children, and descendants are truly ours. We hold firmly to the belief that everything exists in reality. Everything is merely a fabrication of mental formations, citta sankhara, concocting and creating these stories. Dharma, while simple to grasp, is also the most difficult. It is about the mind, which is formless and intangible. It requires using human language to explain something that can't be spoken. The Dharma is like this. It requires using conventional language to help us understand what can't be directly explained. So where is it, that natural truth? We don't know, but we say it resides in the body. It is the mind. It requires using human language to explain something that can't be spoken. Before the Buddha entered Parinibbana, final liberation, he said, "All of you, do not be heedless." As for the meaning of "do not be heedless," people may interpret it in various ways, but let me get straight to the heart of it. It means we must be constantly aware and awake within ourselves. We must observe our own thoughts, feelings, and emotions continuously, from the moment we wake until the moment we sleep. This is what practicing the Dharma truly is. This is what is meant by Satipatthana at the foundation of mindfulness. It is the essence of the path, the essence of the Four Noble Truths. It is the cultivation of wisdom and the practice of Dharma in a single moment of awareness. Practicing the Dharma doesn't require doing anything elaborate or retreating into the forest or mountains. That's not what it's about. If someone enjoys staying in the forest or mountains, that's fine. It's not wrong, but the Dharma does not reside in the forest or mountains. The Dharma is already within the mind. I'm not trying to dismiss anyone's prior knowledge, but I want to clarify this so our wisdom becomes clearer. Once it's explained clearly and we listen, our doubts will fade. When our doubts are gone, the mind will awaken naturally. When the mind listens and understands, it will awaken on its own, through its natural state. There's no need to force it. Mindfulness will arise prominently, and the mind will naturally awaken. It will awaken in its natural way. The mind will naturally see mental formations, citta sankhara, as they arise. Doubts will vanish. The mind will see and understand the truth of impermanence, anicca, suffering, dukkha, and non-self, anatta, continuously by its very nature. The mind sees by itself. It knows by itself, without us having to tell it, "Oh, now this is impermanence." No, it's not about us sitting and thinking about it. It's something that arises naturally in the mind. The mind will perceive it, know it, and summarize it on its own, This is what we call attaining the Dhamma, which is a very subtle matter. That's why I want to say, listen attentively. Even when you're not actively listening, be mindful and aware of your mind. While listening, maintain mindfulness and awareness of your mind. When I say observe the mind, it doesn't mean you have to focus intently on it. Instead, simply be aware, be mindful of each present moment. See the state of the mind as it thinks, feels, and reacts in a given moment. When you see it, let it be. If you're aware of it in time, let it be. If you're not aware of it in time, let it be. Every moment you are mindful and aware in the present. That is what is called a satipatthana, the establishment of mindfulness. Let go of all fixed principles. Let go of all your previous knowledge. Even the teachings I've given about impermanence, anicca, suffering, dukkha, and non-self, anatta, and the teachings on the three characteristics. Don't cling to them. The three characteristics don't have any inherent existence, remember that. But still, listen and strive to understand them. In stillness, awareness begins to disentangle from the continuous stream of mental activity, seeing it as an impersonal flow rather than a fixed identity. Like watching clouds pass through an unchanging sky, the mind observes how thoughts and perceptions arise and fade without claiming them as self. Through this sustained clear seeing, the deep-seated habit of identifying with experience gradually loosens its grip. Each moment of recognition dissolves another strand in the web of misidentification. The mind increasingly rests in its natural state, no longer compelled to grasp or become anything. When this process reaches completion, awareness is fully freed from the cycle of arising and becoming. This ultimate peace transcends all concepts and descriptions, though we might gesture toward it with words. Yet any attempt to name or categorize this freedom can only point to what lies beyond all categories and names. When we see, hear, smell, taste, touch, or experience any mental state, simply be aware of it as it is. Recognize it, and then let it go. This is what the Buddha taught, to remain with the present experience. Every time we become mindful and aware of the present moment, we acknowledge it and then let it pass. The mind will know everything, but it will not cling to or give significance to the object of knowing. Neither will it attach any sense of self to the act of knowing. This process extinguishes the ego, the sense of I and mine. This is the practice for the wisest of practitioners. It resides in mindfulness of the present moment. When awareness arises and the mind knows, it recognizes and lets go. If something arises in the mind, it knows. If an emotion comes up, it knows. And once it knows, it lets it pass. It doesn't get involved or engage with it further. It knows that this emotion has arisen, and then it moves on. It doesn't care why it arose or concern itself with its cause, because it understands. Let's continue. After iron forgets that it is iron and starts to think it is rust. We too have forgotten that we are the mind, Sita. Instead, we think that we are the body. We become caught up in the stories of the world, leading it to endlessly cycle through birth and death in the three realms of existence. We believe that these things are ours, but in truth they are not. When we are swept away by all the fabrications of the mind, carried along by emotions and thoughts, whatever we think about, we get swept up in it. Whatever emotions arise, we flow along with them. When things go our way and satisfy our desires, we feel happy and delighted, which only fuels our craving for more. But when things do not go our way, we feel disappointed and deeply suffer. When the suffering becomes unbearable, we might turn to the temple or spiritual practice to escape it. But going to the temple is often more like running away, running from suffering. It may bring temporary relief and make us feel as though we've found peace, but once we return to our normal lives and encounter suffering again, we flee from it once more. The state of suffering, dukkha, is not something to be feared or avoided. It is a universal truth and an inherent part of reality. Both suffering and happiness are natural phenomena that simply exist as they are, revealing their nature to the mind. Mental formations, citta sankhara, continually demonstrate the truth to us. They remind us of impermanence, constant change, and the arising and ceasing of all phenomena. They show us that they are part of nature, devoid of ownership, and not something to cling to. These truths are present every moment, from the time we wake up until we fall asleep. However, instead of recognizing and letting go, we habitually become entangled, clinging to these formations and ignoring their messages. This habitual clinging is what perpetuates the endless cycle of birth and death, spanning countless lifetimes with no foreseeable end in sight. When the mind flows with mental fabrications, it is ignorance, avidya. This includes being swept up in thoughts, emotions, or the effort to act, observe, or understand. All forms of striving and clinging to these processes are rooted in ignorance. Observe this carefully. Avidya, ignorance, dominates the mind at every moment. From the time we wake up until we fall asleep, it keeps the mind immersed in unawareness, unable to perceive the truth of nature. The way to extinguish avidya, ignorance, is by cultivating mindfulness and awareness in the present moment. This awareness is what is called satipatthana, the establishment of mindfulness. It is the most direct, shortest, and fastest way to practice the Dhamma. Listening to the Dhamma is the best method to attain enlightenment. I will teach the Dhamma that leads to wisdom, offering a concise and direct path focused solely on the mind to help you attain enlightenment as quickly as possible. The practice requires mindfulness and awareness, guiding the mind to see this truth. When the mind perceives this truth, it will separate itself from mental formations and reach enlightenment, even in the process of listening. As you continue listening, the mind will gradually awaken by its own natural process. When the mind awakens and continually perceives the truth, it is in that very moment of seeing the truth that what we call wisdom, panya, arises. As you continue listening and observing the mind, you will gradually see that mental formations, citta sankhara, the thoughts, emotions, and fabrications, are all subject to the three characteristics, tilakkhana. They are impermanent, not self, and without inherent substance. They simply exist as they are, not us or ours. When the mind recognizes this truth, it will begin to loosen its attachment and clinging. Ignorance, avidya, will be completely severed, and the mind will become liberated. This liberation arises through practice, which fundamentally relies on cultivating mindfulness and awareness in the present moment. Every time we become mindful and aware of the present moment, that very moment embodies both mindfulness, sati, and concentration, samadhi. In that same moment, ignorance, avidya, is also severed. This means that the mind has separated itself from mental formations, citta sankhara, no longer flowing along with them. It is mindfulness and awareness itself that causes the mind to momentarily separate from mental formations, citta sankhara. This happens in just a single moment of awareness. Every time we become mindful, even for a brief instant, when we suddenly notice or become aware, that very moment is when ignorance, avidya, is severed. In that instant, the mind steps back and observes the mental formations and fabrications, while the citta sankhara continues to express itself. Imagine you are sitting and eating a meal, chatting and scooping food into your mouth. You recall that you had put the kettle on the stove before sitting down to eat, intending to turn off the gas later. A vivid mental image forms in your mind, a boiling kettle left on the stove. Can we become aware that just before the startled reaction occurred, a mental image had arisen? At that moment, can you notice the process? If you become aware simultaneously, this is a moment of profound mindfulness. Such simultaneous awareness, when fully recognized, can lead to a transformative realization. It is as though lightning strikes in your chest, illuminating everything in a single flash. This brief yet powerful moment of clarity reveals the nature of awareness itself. If the realization is deep enough, it can even lead to enlightenment in that very instant. As you become aware and startled, you rush to the stove, only to see the kettle with black smoke rising. It's clear the water has dried up, and the kettle is about to catch fire. In that moment, you feel a sudden sense of alarm, another wave of being startled. This reaction begins subtly, as the mind silently forms a thought like, "Oh no, disaster," without verbalizing it. This quiet fabrication of the mind Citta Sankara, is a natural ripple of mental activity triggered by what the eyes see. When you become aware and startled, you quickly get up and rush to the stove. As you look at the kettle, you see smoke rising thick, black smoke. The water has dried up and it's starting to burn. At that moment, you feel a sudden sense of alarm, startled again. The process starts with your eyes seeing the black smoke, and then a thought arises silently in your mind. It doesn't speak, but it's a subtle fabrication, Citta Sankara, that forms a meaning like, oh no, disaster. This is a ripple in the mind creating this thought. Can you recognize this reaction? When you see the smoke, this thought and feeling arises. Then your mouth opens and you shout, fire, loudly. Can you observe this entire process happening within you? This is the practice guiding the mind to detach itself from Citta Sankhara, mental formations, as a natural state arises and reveals itself to the heart, especially in moments when we are angry, about to become intensely angry, deeply startled, or experiencing a powerful emotion that shakes the mind and heart. If we can become mindful and aware in that very moment, it has the potential to become the most extraordinary opportunity for profound realization and enlightenment. It is the realization of Dhamma in a single moment of consciousness. When we repeatedly observe emotions and thoughts with mindfulness, the mind will gradually become more at ease. It will feel brighter, lighter, and more spacious. As the mind recognizes and lets go of these thoughts and emotions, it will no longer be carried away by Citta Sankhara, mental formations. Over time, the mind will naturally detach itself from these formations more frequently. Eventually, there will come a day when the mind completely separates from Citta Sankhara, no longer influenced or carried away by them. This results in an increasing sense of lightness, clarity, and ease. The mind becomes unburdened, letting go of attachments, and this process continues until it reaches its ultimate state, arahantship. At that point, all doubts and fears, including the fear of death, are gone. Even as early as the stage of stream entry, sotapanna, fear of death begins to diminish. From that point on, the mind becomes more stable and grounded, observing everything with equanimity. When illness or pain arises, the mind simply observes it as it is, without clinging or suffering. If breathing becomes difficult or even life-threatening, the mind simply knows it as it is. One can lie there, watching the process of the body deteriorating without resistance. Physical sensations follow their natural course, governed by causes and conditions. Even when intense sensations arise, such as sharp pain or difficulty breathing, the mind recognizes them clearly, but does not indulge in or cling to them. These experiences are present, but the mind understands and remains at ease. It simply knows, observes, and lets go. Even as the body stops functioning, the mind continues to know until it ceases to arise entirely, reaching liberation. This is the nature of a mind with wisdom. It operates with clarity, detachment, and equanimity, steadily progressing toward ultimate freedom. And with this, the explanation concludes here. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.